All right, last story of the day. This is
King Joe, dude.
Yeah, this is the SLATE teardown of Joe Rogan. That is totally intellectually bankrupt. So let's take a look.
Oh, what? No.
Joe Rogan's Galaxy Brain, how the former Fear Factor host podcast became an essential platform for free thinkers who hate the left.
Who? What?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but what you've just how you've characterized Joe Rogan's show is totally false. Probably better than anyone I've ever seen. Maybe Bill Maher is as number one in this. Has people who have a different opinion than him on his show. He's talked to
Constantly.
people. I mean, he constantly is discussing ideas with people that he doesn't agree with necessarily. And, like, he defends unpopular ideas. So to say, like, Joe Rogan is some dude that's just like, oh, he just has a bunch of fucking racist free thinkers on his show. It's like, look, Joe Rogan's given a platform to pretty much almost every point of fucking view that I can think of. He's had neuroscientists, scientists, authors, writers, musicians. I mean, fucking directors. It runs the gamut.
So the big thing that they're taking issue with is basically just you might have heard the argument before from various liberals. It's just the argument is Joe Rogan is what would you call it? A gateway drug into the alt-right philosophy or something.
Joe Rogan is a self-described libertarian.
Right. And here's the problem I have with it. It's like their argument basically, I mean, the article is huge. It just goes on and on and on.
Oh, but he's popular. It's a huge teardown.
It's pro-deplatforming and stuff. And
they want to take him off, dude? Are you fucking kidding me?
I don't think they actually...
are they showing Sargon of Akkad? Is that their fucking smoking gun? Oh, no, Sam Harris?
So I guess we can read some of it. I was planning on just kind of summarizing it, but...
Sam Harris is the fuck... Okay.
All right, so here we go.
Go ahead and read it.
On February 7th, on the 1,241st episode of his podcast, comedian Joe Rogan kicked off a discussion of one of the signal injustices of our time, the deplatforming of jerks on the internet. Obviously a sarcastic statement. Rogan was against it, as was his guest, the author and podcaster Sam Harris, who urged Rogan's listeners to consider the plight of all the witty provocateurs who have lately begun to suffer real-life consequences for their trollish online banter. Harris bemoaned a world where people are having their reputations destroyed and their careers threatened for tweets they sent as teenagers, though he didn't specify whose reputations had been ruined by their teenage tweets, and Rogan didn't ask him to clarify. All right, so obviously he's not literally talking about teenage tweets necessarily. He's talking about tweets from 10 years ago coming back to haunt public figures because the social mores have changed since then.
I mean,
if you want some examples of that, how about the Guardians of the Galaxy director? His name escapes me at the moment. James Gunn. He made some off-color jokes 10 years ago or something on Twitter. He was shit-canned, although he was eventually allowed to come back. What about Roseanne Barr, who lost her namesake sitcom over a tweet, and there was not even time to investigate the tweet or for her to make any sort of public apology for the tweet or to explain the tweet or anything like that. It was just there was a tweet, there was controversy, she was immediately fired. What about...
You were banned off Twitter temporarily.
Yeah,
Alex Jones was deplatformed.
I was banned off of Twitter, and if
Milo was deplatformed.
If it hadn't been for very influential people like Glenn Greenwald, who I know does not give a fuck about me 99.99999% of the time, taking up the cause just because they're against the censorship. If it hadn't been for people like that actually getting wind of it and taking a stand against it, I think my Twitter would still be banned over some off-color remark. Alex Jones was pretty much wiped off the face of the internet, and I know that this author probably supports that, but that's another example. There's tons of people who have been censored off the face of the fucking internet or censored off of various influential platforms in a misguided attempt to defeat their arguments.
I mean, look at just now. Courtney Love, Guy Adams, Phil Mason, Thunderfoot. These are temporary suspensions, but I mean, a lot of people have been...
Right. People have been banned for really shitty reasons.
Milo,
people have been suspended for shitty reasons.
PewDiePie.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's happened tons of times. So acting like you can't summon up an example is just very disingenuous. But the implication was clear. Holding people accountable for what they say and what those words do is an offense far worse than saying cruel, racist, and divisive things in the first place. Well, yeah, absolutely it is. That is not only the implication, but that, in my opinion, is the truth. Because you're definite when you say when you say holding people accountable for what they say, what you're really talking about is not accountability but censorship. You're talking about censorship. And is censorship worse than people being mean on the internet? Yeah, it is. There's no mistake there. I mean, you can disagree, I guess, on terms of maybe you feel differently, but frame the argument in a legitimate way. You're defending censorship, so do that. Don't pretend like it's just accountability. Accountability would be someone says something stupid and they're roundly rejected by the people. Or someone says something that's wrong or immoral or whatever the fuck, and they're held accountable by their peers. What you're talking about is artificial constraint on the part of these tech giants to censor people's perspectives when they haven't done anything that crosses the line. And the line, in my opinion, should be you can't harass people. And harassment is defined as, in most states, actually in somehow threatening their safety and causing an annoyance. Not just like, oh, you annoyed me temporarily.
Yeah,
but
a pattern of repeated behavior.
Basically where it amounts to like emotional fucking abuse of a person. When it comes to that level, then you can make a case. But when someone is just putting forth an unpopular political position that SLATE.com doesn't agree with, that's not grounds for accountability in the form of mass censorship and deplatforming. And it's a dishonest way to frame the argument. So the proximate cause of Harris's smarm was neither a teenager nor a Twitter troll, but an actor who had just made a rather old-fashioned mistake of saying something dumb to a journalist. In an interview promoting a new movie, Liam Neeson had bizarrely volunteered that as a younger man, he had roamed the streets hoping to be provoked into killing any black man, in retaliation for a friend's rape. Harris, who has a practiced eye for these things, saw great liberal hypocrisy in the way many online had read racism in the Neeson statement. Well, that particular burst of outrage was completely predicated upon a false notion that Liam Neeson was somehow endorsing that kind of behavior, when in fact the reason that he brought up the story was as a cautionary tale, telling people not to be blinded by that sort of racist impulse, that sort of bigotry. And him saying, look, I'm not that kind of person, and it still happened to me because I was so blinded with rage at this horrible rape that had happened to my friend. But you can't allow that sort of hatred to cloud your judgment and to taint who you are. That was his point in bringing up the story. So to shame him for that, when actually what he did was quite courageous,
and say it's dumb. Oh, he's
shitty.
He's a fucking empty-headed actor who said some dumb shit. Should have just kept. So you're basically arguing that he could have kept his mouth shut. Okay, that's amazing that someone that would say that obviously the way you lean politically and the way this article is written, that you would endorse someone basically keeping that thought to themselves.
It goes on to criticize his platforming.
What's the part they highlighted? Go back to that.
Okay.
Down,
here.
Down. No, keep going.
Listening to the Joe Rogan Experience is sort of like crashing an intense, intimate dinner party in which the only courses are whiskey and weed.
That makes it sound pretty cool, dude.
Yeah, that seems like an endorsement to me. Here's the real problem with this. Basically, the argument that's being made here in this giant, endless, fucking snide, condescending, liberal, fucking jerk-off sesh is that Joe Rogan...
You're giving Alex Jones a platform.
Right.
I can see that coming.
He platforms some unsavory people that these people don't like, and they're against it because it makes these people seem more palatable. But the fucking fact of the matter is that Joe Rogan's podcast has platformed people from across the political fucking spectrum. He's platformed Kyle Kalinske. He's platformed Jimmy Dore. He's platformed Tulsi Gabbard. He's platformed Andrew Yang. He's platformed me. He's platformed tons of different people from all over the ideological spectrum, from left to right to whatever.
Politically fucking agnostic. It does. I mean, like.
Yeah, I mean, he's covered stuff that has nothing to do with politics.
He just covers MMA shit. Does that mean he endorses violence now? I mean, come on. It's just so fucking stupid.
And
dude.
I mean, with the exception of Alex Jones, I feel like most of the right-wingers that he has spotlighted on his show are representative of mainstream right-wing thought. Like Ben Shapiro, do I like him? No. Is he an alt-right extremist? No. He's just a right-winger. He's just your typical fucking right-winger.
You know what? They're just mad that Joe Rogan now has such an influential and popular podcast, and he's not just playing by this liberal playbook that they want him to play by. Because you definitely can see what
They
Joe
want.
Rogan,
I mean, they want him to be fucking Samantha Bee or some shit.
He has some liberal leanings, but Joe Rogan is his own man. He's gonna come up with his own opinions, and I think Joe Rogan, for the most part, he does lean libertarian, but he really just thinks for himself. And I mean, sometimes he's giving you his opinion, and sometimes he's just shutting the fuck up and letting people talk. And you could say, although that's, I mean, there's obviously sometimes there's gonna be ideas presented. Like, look, he's had people on the show I totally disagree with, but I was like, that guy's an idiot.
The premise of Joe Rogan's show
is still interesting and entertaining.
Yeah, the premise of his show is I'm going to bring interesting people onto my show, and I'm going to let them talk, and maybe there'll be some pushback. And I can tell you, when I was on Joe Rogan, like, I felt like they were quick to fact check me on stuff. Like, I made some claims on Joe Rogan's show about Steven Crowder faking, this fight with this union guy. I put forth the premise that Steven Crowder actually started the fight, and I got pushback on it from Joe Rogan. I also, at one point, said that Trump's inauguration being besieged by protesters was nothing different than Bush's inauguration, because he also was hounded by protesters, and they fact-checked me on the spot. So to act like you just go on this show and spout your opinion and there's no fact-checking and they don't challenge you on anything is total bullshit. I was definitely challenged on some things, and also I was fact-checked on the spot for things I said, and if I had said something that wasn't true and been fact-checked on it, I would have had to eat crow right there live on Joe Rogan. But I was, fortunately, the things I said were factual, and there was no incident like that.
Yeah, so it's pretty much kind of like, okay. But yeah, but like, I don't think people realize that about the show. I mean, a lot of times, like, pull it up, or like, it's because Joe Rogan's someone I think that at least wants to get an idea of what the truth could be. I don't think he's necessarily saying, okay, you're wrong, but I think he'd have to say, like, well, there's no evidence that suggests what you're saying is true.
Joe Rogan is basically the modern-day podcast internet equivalent of Larry King, what Larry King used to be back in the day.
Yeah.
Where, he's not the guy that's going to do the hardball interview. He's not that dude. He's the guy that wants to hear different fucking perspectives on things. And that's what he was good at. That's what Joe's good at. And I'm not saying that Joe never pushes back or anything like that, but for the most part, he's there to have a pleasant conversation with people. That's why I didn't understand when so many people were mad at his Jack Dorsey interview. I guess I did understand why people were upset, because there's so many things that people felt like he should have brought up. But Joe was just doing what he always does, which is letting people talk and letting them put forth their narrative. And obviously, in that case, Joe actually did bring him back on and do a tougher interview, showing that he could do that. But that's not what his show's about. It's not about being the show that's in your face and like, oh, I'm not going to let anything stand or slide. The biggest example I ever remember of him taking someone on was actually a conservative. It was when Steven Crowder was on his show, and they had this big conflict about marijuana and whether it was harmful to society and so on and so forth. And Joe totally, went against Steven Crowder on that, and it actually was a debate and an argument. So there was a big pushback against that, and that was against a conservative guest. But for the most part, that's not Joe Rogan's style. He likes to hear people ruminate. He wants to give people a platform, and sometimes he gives it to right-wingers, sometimes he gives it to left-wingers, sometimes he gives it to centrists, sometimes he gives it to people who are apolitical.
I think it's like anyone else.
It's very egalitarian, the approach he's using. So to make a criticism of it is basically just saying to me, Joe Rogan, if he wants to wield this kind of power, needs to toe our line, and he needs to only platform people who agree with our mentality. And that's just not what his show is, and it wouldn't be as big and respected if it did that.
No, it wouldn't. I mean, he's staying true to his vision for the show. And I mean, whether you like his show or not, I think it's boring or whatever. I mean, the facts are that Joe Rogan is the singular force behind that show. And as far as the ideas and where that's come from, it's totally coming from his brain. And like you said, I think when Joe Rogan has a fight with the guest or has a big argument with the guest, it's because he truly and honestly believes that this is that he has to do that. It's the right thing to do. And that's happened so seldom and so rarely. he debates a lot of times. Like, oh, I don't necessarily agree with that, but like, he's not someone that's full of shit. So I think to say that like he's just a gateway drug to the alt-right is not true. He's had such a spectrum of guests on.
I can't think of anyone he's actually platformed that I would consider alt-right. He's definitely the craziest person I could ever think of him having on was Alex Jones.
Yeah.
And that's because they have a personal relationship with one another.
Going back over 20 years.
Right. They've been friends for a long, long time. But I can't think of anyone more extreme than Alex Jones he's ever had on the show. He had Jordan Peterson on, who Jordan Peterson has actively come out against the alt-right. He's had Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad on, who's also actively come out against the alt-right. He's had Sam Harris on, who is pretty much a liberal, who has a little bit of a hawkish streak, which doesn't make him all that different from a lot of mainstream corporate Democrats, honestly. I'm trying to think of who else he's had that they might object to on some level. Probably the most objectionable at the end of the day is Alex Jones, and of course he's featured in this article. Alex Jones is a guy who's been censored from huge swaths of the internet, and people want to hear from Alex Jones.
Yeah, and that episode has like 12 million fucking listens or views, or on. I'm sure on iTunes it's even more.
Look, this is a compelling fucking figure in our society, and it's like you think that by censoring him, you're going to take away his ability to be a compelling and dynamic figure that people are fascinated by, and you're not going to do it. You're just not. It's just not going to happen. I just don't understand how so many people on the left, who I agree with on so much, other than this, continue to see deplatforming as a means of, somehow defeating the right. It doesn't defeat them. It pushes them into echo chambers where they get more extreme. I think that the fucking censorship on the left has done more for the alt-right than Joe Rogan ever could have fucking done.
And not to mention,
by platforming a few fucking mainstream right-wingers and one case of a nut job like Alex Jones that I can think of. Maybe there's more. I don't watch every episode of Joe Rogan. I've probably seen, 30 or 40 episodes of it. So I'm not speaking, I can't speak to the full breadth and depth of his work. I have clearly not watched all 1,200 and whatever episodes. So I don't know what kind of voices have been on there in the past, but I can tell you of the high profile guests that I know about and have seen, and understand, I don't agree with all of them. And a lot of them are way to the right of me, but I can't think of any single time that there's never been like, here's Richard Spencer or here's this, David Duke or something. Like, if someone like that was on the show openly advocating for racist ideology in no uncertain terms and there was no pushback, then I can see this argument. But since that's never, to my knowledge, happened, it just seems totally fallacious.
Dude, not to mention this, like, this pearl-clutching shit. It's like, Joe Rogan smokes weed and drinks whiskey, and it's like, dude, that's not what the podcast is about. I've probably watched 100 episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience.
Yeah.
I mean, does some weed get smoked? Sure.
Sometimes, yeah.
Does some alcohol get fucking drank? Like, sure. But a lot of times they're just doing a fucking show. It's not like Joe is fucking sloppy, fucking drunk. And,
I'm Joe Rogan. Yeah.
That's just prudish bullshit. Because they show him, it's like, look at this. Oh, and there's a money symbol. It's the Illuminati, and it's fucking, he's drunk and he's stoned. And like the Elon Musk episode, they talk about like Joe Rogan like fucking gave him a spliff and he took a puff. It's like,
yeah, what's all this hand wringing? Like, oh god,
oh, that's so immoral.
He smokes weed and drinks whiskey. Oh no, it's like, who's the conservative again here? Anyway, fuck Slate for putting out this shit article. And who's this author's name? This is Justin Peters. He's a moron. Let's see if we find a picture of this guy.
It's Justin Peters,
Slate correspondent, author of The Idealist Aaron Swartz and the Rise of Free Culture on the Internet. Wow. Well,
sounds riveting.
Sounds also antithetical to what you're saying here, so that's kind of lame. Yeah, I mean, like, it's just another fucking freedom of speech for me, but not for the bullshit narrative argument.
Which is, all the shit you pulled just seems increasingly common.
Oh my god, it's so terrible.